Yay! Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Conversations with Carnivores. I'm your host, Christina Mathewson, naturopath, herbalist, life coach, and carnivore. And I'm basically hosting these conversations so that we can connect with other people and share the information that for me has been absolutely life-changing. And I'm sure for my guest today has also had some life-changing experiences as well. So please join me in welcoming David to the actual show. Hey David, welcome to Conversations with Carnivore.
Hello, well, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So we found each other. Well, I found you in a Facebook group. So Carnivore for Christians or Christians for Carnivores, something along those lines. Found you in that space. And I was like, yes, oh my goodness, because I've been looking for a bit of my own tribe when it comes to like my faith and, you know, going into carnivore, because of course there is a whole plethora of different like Bible diets and so on. But I don't think carnivore is actually one of the ones that I've actually come across from that perspective before either. So I'm going to ask you a ton of questions, but my first one is, how have you found carnivore with your faith?
I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we have what's called a word of wisdom. And that dictates, no caffeine, no tobacco, and to eat meat in moderation, along with other foods. But the nice thing about our church is if you have a medical necessity, then they don't have an issue with it. So I actually went and talked to my bishop about it, and I actually found out that there were a couple other leaders in the church that are carnivore as well for health reasons.
Oh wow. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
I was really surprised to hear that. One fellow in particular, I won't say too much that can identify him, but he's was in a major leadership position in our area, and he went on carnivore to help with getting over cancer.
Yep.
So that was a very valuable tool for him. So I don't know much of the detail because of how sick I was for so long. I hadn't been to church in a long time. So because I was actually bedridden for 10 years due to all the autoimmune diseases and stuff that I have.
Oh, wow. So let's jump into that a little bit. Let's start with what took you into carnivore? Like what led you on that pathway in that direction?
Well, I should give you a little bit of a context, a bit of a quick overview. So back in 2012, I was officially diagnosed with myasthenia gravis. While they were trying to figure out that diagnosis, I was diagnosed with over a 3 or 4 year period. I was diagnosed with a bunch of other autoimmune diseases as well. So I've got spinal stenosis, Sjogren's. There's a couple others. It's slipping my mind at the moment. But by the time I got to the hospital, I couldn't eat solid food, couldn't take pills, I could barely breathe, I couldn't walk, couldn't talk. I could make noise, but nobody could understand me except my wife.
Wow.
And when they finally diagnosed me, I went right into the ER, and then a bunch more testing, and they started doing a series of plasma exchanges. So basically they put in a line into my neck that went down to my heart. So they would take out the blood and separate the plasma from it, replace the plasma with artificial, pump it back into my heart. And so basically I got a complete oil change like 5 times. And that actually worked miracles. It got me to where I could, walk around a bit and talk and eat and that kind of thing. But that only kind of got me so far. And I had some surgery. So I had a thymectomy a few months later. And because I was so obese, I was beyond morbidly obese. Like I'm 6'3", or about 193 centimeters. And I weighed 540 pounds. I'm not sure what that is in kilos.
Would be quick translation for those in Australia, just go with half. You're not going to quite get there. It's probably more like 300 kilos, between 250 to 300-ish kilos.
Yeah, you just take the pounds and divide by 2.2 and that gives you kilos.
Yeah.
That only kind of got me so far, and I wound up being kind of bedridden for about 10 years. I could barely walk around the apartment, enough to go to the washroom or go get something to drink from the fridge. But usually even that was quite a task. And by the time I got to, I think it was 2018, I had absolutely had enough. I couldn't take living that way anymore. So I knew the doctors weren't going to do anything more for me. So I started researching alternative therapies. And, I tried some various things, different types of meditation to help start dealing with the pain. I have a lot of back injury issues. And that was part of the reason that my mental acuity was so affected, because I was on super high doses of morphine. Yep. And I had been for like 10 years. So I knew the first thing I had to do was get off the morphine. So I started learning these pain control techniques, started tapering off the morphine. It took about 9-10 months to completely get off of it. And I used cannabis for a while to deal with pain. But by the time Christmas rolled around, or Christmas Eve actually, was the last pain modification medication of any kind that I took. And then I started on a keto diet, and to lose weight. I knew that was the next thing I needed to do. And I wanted to start getting off of medications. So when I started this, trying to get a little healthier again, I was on 19 different prescriptions.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I would say about half of those prescriptions were to deal with side effects of the main prescription.
Yes.
So yeah, and I was on all kinds of weird pills for the autoimmune stuff and the myasthenia gravis. For those who aren't aware, myasthenia gravis causes severe muscle weakness. So they had me on immune suppressants and a product called Mestinon, which basically replaces the chemical my muscles needed to communicate. But it only helps so much.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it doesn't really do a whole lot. I was able to start walking around a little more. And by summer, I guess by about August of 2019, because I had started losing weight actually in about 2017 was when I started doing the keto. So by August of 2019, I was down to 344 pounds. And then that world madness kind of hit, and everybody was locked indoors. And depression hit, and I put on a bunch of weight again. So I went back up to 480 pounds. And then about a year ago, I went back on to keto. And I had my daughter's wedding coming up. So I was trying to lose some weight for that, but kind of instigated me to go. So by the time her wedding was in June, so by the time I got down there, I had lost about 20-25 pounds or so, but I still looked awful. Yeah. And when I saw myself on camera and photographs and stuff, I was like, so that inspired me to keep going. Now, of course, losing weight certainly made me feel better. And, some of the pain from my back injuries and stuff got a little bit better as time went on. I could move around better. And fast forward to about December of last year, and my weight loss stalled. I got to 391 and I couldn't get past it. I was just stuck.
Yep.
So I started doing some praying. Over the years, I had done a lot of praying for healing. And I had gotten a couple of priesthood blessings for healing, but I was told both times by two separate people doing the blessings that my back injuries would not be healed in a direct manner like that. So, and then later when I got sick with all the autoimmune stuff, then, I had another blessing and, to help me get through surgery and stuff. And I was told again that the path for me was I had to go through some stuff.
Yep.
Which I did. But this time I changed the way I prayed. I prayed about finding the resources to get the knowledge I needed to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And within about 48 hours, I stumbled across Dr. Ken Berry and talking about the carnivore diet. And he started talking about how it heals autoimmune disease. And I went, not only can it help me get back to weight loss, but this could be pretty serious. And as soon as I saw that first video, I knew that it was what I was supposed to be doing. Unfortunately for me, I've got a personality that I just like to dive into things and go off the deep end. I've got Asperger's, so I'm on the spectrum. So I tend to do stuff like that. I just dove in and, of course, suffered the carnivore flu as a result. And, I'd been eating a little more sugar than I should have been on keto. That was probably part of the reason I had stopped losing weight. But so there were definitely, a couple of weeks of nasty headaches and diarrhea and this kind of stuff until I fat adapted.
All the fun things.
Yeah, got all the toxins out of my system. But once all that kind of went away, the first thing I noticed was that, like, I've got osteoarthritis is another one of the autoimmune diseases I've got. And I noticed that all the pain in my joints and my hands and that were going away. And I could actually, for the first time in a long time, I could close my hands all the way. And the pain was just going away. And it was kind of funny because just before I officially started carnivore January 16th of this year, and about a week and a half to 2 weeks before I started, we'd had a power outage in the building. We live on the second floor. I had gotten enough better that I was barely able to manage the stairs. Took both hands on one rail and every ounce of strength I had to get up those 2 flights. And by the time I got to the top, I could barely breathe. I went and sat on the couch, and it took me 3 or 4 hours before I could even get off the couch again. It was, I'd been losing weight and everything, but I still had the autoimmune stuff. It was still there. And then after I'd been on carnivore about 2 weeks, we had this time it was a planned power outage, so they could fix what had caused the first one the months before. And so I was forced to walk up the stairs again. This time I kept one hand on the rail for balance, just in case, but I went up those stairs like a normal person. I was out of breath for about 10 minutes, and that was it. I was fine. And I knew right then and there, carnivore was going to be a permanent solution. That was it. Yep. I made up my mind right there. Initially, I planned to do like 60 or 90 days to see what happened. But yeah, that's all I needed. And all my other autoimmune stuff has just been going away ever since, getting better and better. So I still, I'll get a little flare of, I've got some issues with my skin that'll kind of go up and down sometimes. But for the most part, everything's going away. On February 16th, I had an appointment with my neurologist. She was absolutely stunned at what a change there'd been, because she hadn't talked to me for a couple of years. And when she looked at the blood work, and I told her about what had happened with the elevator, or the not being able to take the elevator, she took me off the last of my autoimmune medication, and she was absolutely thrilled. And then at that point, I was still on 2 other medications. I was on medication for high blood pressure. My blood pressure had gotten absolutely insane there for a while. I think the highest reading they got on me was 216 over 174.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was just craziness.
You must have had like a permanent headache with that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was just nuts. So they also had me on medication for my thyroid. And so I think it was February 19th was my last day for my blood pressure medication. And a couple days later, I finished up the stuff for my thyroid. Haven't taken any of that since. And my blood pressure now sits down. I average around, 120 something over like 72-ish, in that range.
So really normal.
Yeah, and without the benefit of any medication. And I've also I use the iodine, potassium iodide, actually, for my thyroid. It took a little testing and working stuff out, but 3 drops a day seems to do the trick. And I got some blood work back just about a little over a week ago. And a little over a year ago, my A1C was 6.1, so I was pre-diabetic. And then after I'd been on keto a few months, it went down to 5.7 and kind of held there. And then on my latest blood work, I was down to 5.3. Thank you, Carnivores.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
So we've definitely been doing some interesting things, finding ways to save money on buying the meat and stuff. But what we discovered is that because I'm not buying anything else, then it's actually no more expensive than a regular diet. Plus, I was able to save money because so much of the pain went away, because I wound up using cannabis again for a while. So I was able to ditch the cannabis again permanently. And what was the other thing? Boy.
For me, when it comes to budget-wise stuff, though, for my family, well, for me, my kids and my husband are probably about 80% carnivore. But I find that we don't have any waste products. Like, back in the day when we were having salads and all of the vegetables and all of the fruits, like we had so much waste that we had to get rid of every day just because, apple cores and all sorts of other stuff. We just don't even have that waste anymore. Like we literally eat through pretty much everything that we've got. And our waste is just the wrapper that the thing came in versus like, nobody's eating this meal, so let's feed it to the chickens or put it in the compost or do something else with it. Like we just don't even have that waste anymore. So from a budget perspective, for me, I find that's a lot cheaper as well. And I think there are lots of little things you learn along the way. Like different areas are going to have different things. Like we have been traveling around Australia, so I know that in the country towns, they don't really have the cheap shops, but they do often have lots of discount sales. And in the big cities, they've got the cheap shops. So every area has their own thing that you've just kind of got to learn to help make it more budget friendly. But also too, the other thing is you're not buying all the pharmaceuticals. Like you haven't got that big list of medication that you're paying for. I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but in Australia we have the public health system in the sense where they reduce that medication price for you. But I was behind a lady in the chemist the other day, and she didn't have nearly as much as what you were on at your 19 at the highest. And her thing for the day was like $300 of medication. I'm like, I could buy some really good food for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the other thing. Like I'm actually in Canada. So our medication and stuff, for the most part, is covered. So I'm on disability. So they pretty much pay for just about everything. But I was having to take a lot of vitamins in addition. So I was spending, about $300 a month vitamins. I think our dollar is about on par with yours.
Yeah. Yeah, we're pretty similar.
Yeah, it'd be about the same there. And then of course I was probably spending $200 or $300 a month on cannabis. It's legal here. It's been completely legal for a while now. When I first started using it, I had to get a prescription for it. But so that's a lot of expense gone right there. And then because I know quite a few people from farms and stuff, we actually got in on a group buy. So we had a farmer friend of ours. He bought 7 whole pigs from a local Hutterite colony. So we got one of them and we butchered that. Now I used to butcher stuff all the time when I grew up on a farm, but I lost so much muscle strength from my diseases that I couldn't actually do much of the initial butchering to quarter the animal up and stuff. Luckily, there was lots of people around to help us. So, but that was like a huge money saver. And plus the meat is so much better than what you buy in the store. By the time I paid for the salt to cure my own bacon and some stuff for wrapping, that kind of thing. We wound up paying about $1.75 a pound. Yeah, and we got about
That's so
150
cheap.
pounds of meat. Yeah. The only I guess kind of a downside is when we got our tax return money right about that same time. So I had to go and spend a good chunk of that on a new freezer. But I mean that's okay. I mean we'll have that permanently, and nice upright freezer, so we were able to fill that, and it's been absolutely wonderful. And my wife's very good about finding sales on other meat and stuff. She just found a fantastic sale on sirloin tip roast. So it's not got a lot of fantastic flavor because there's not very much marbling in it, but inexpensive, and it's reasonably tender if you take a few precautions when you're preparing it. And of course we can always add butter or bacon grease or whatever. I started learning how to make some of my own condiments. So I made my first carnivore mayonnaise with melted butter.
Yeah.
And I actually added kefir to it to ferment it, so that instead of only lasting a few days, it lasts for months in the fridge.
And you've got all of those beautiful probiotics in there as well.
Oh, for sure. Now, the only downside to that was that I couldn't let it sit in the fridge for months, eating a little bit here and there. I started eating it by the spoonful as a snack. Not good. So I gained like 6 pounds over about a week. So I am going to be
only a little bit at a time.
Yeah, exactly. So the next batch I make, I'll actually be putting that on my YouTube channel. So when I started on carnivore and saw what it was doing for me, I figured, well, I really should be showing my progress on this, not only to help other people, but to help keep me honest and accountable.
Yeah.
And I already had a few years experience doing YouTube stuff with another channel I've got, and I also do all the editing for another little larger channel. So I figured, well, I should put those skills to use, and we'll make this channel, and we'll cover my health journey. And something that I've put in there to help people is I made a playlist that's publicly available that has links from all the different doctors and researchers, and there's a couple documentaries in there. I think I've got just about 60 videos linked in there now. So if somebody's looking for more information, they can hit that playlist, and it's really going to give them what they need.
Yeah, awesome. So for those folks that are home watching this going, oh, what's his YouTube channel? Do you want to tell us the name?
Oh, yes. It's Fuzzy Road to Health. So
Fuzzy Road to Health.
Yeah. So Fuzzy is spelled Fuzzee. It's actually a nickname that I got years and years ago that kind of went into everything I do now. It's kind of become an identity. So Fuzzy Road to Health, and I'm Fuzzy D, and I use that moniker for all the social media stuff that I do.
Yeah.
But
I love it.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to find. You can just put in the youtube.com/ and then the @ symbol, and then Fuzzy Road to Health, and it'll take you right there.
Awesome. So there was a whole heap of stuff in there that I'd like to tease out just a little bit more, because one in particular was you mentioned that you went and had prayer. And it's one of those things, like in the sort of the space of faith that I talk about with a number of other, believers as well, that we sometimes have this idea that we pray and it's all going to get better. But actually, I think sometimes God has bigger plans for us, which is that we actually learn to get better. We learn to actually break free of those things that are actually keeping us sick, because I've seen it time and time again where people have prayed, somebody's gotten better, and then 6 months later they're in the same position as they were because nothing else changed. Like they didn't change their lifestyle, they didn't change the way that they were doing anything. No change actually took place in them other that they were pain-free, or they didn't have, the ramifications of their illness for a period of time. And so for me, hearing you say that, I'm like, yes, this is what I'm saying. I'm saying this, yes, absolutely. There's going to be those moments where somebody prays and bam, all done. But I feel like for a lot of our lifestyle diseases, that it's actually more about us getting free of the bondage of things like food addictions and other things that are actually habitually that are keeping us trapped and stuck and creating more actual freedom for us to start with. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because the last Church General Conference that we had, like the World Broadcast General Conference, they do that twice a year. And there was a really interesting scripture that was pointed out, the story of Lazarus. So before Christ actually resurrects him, he asks them to do some things first before he'll actually do the work and raise him back from the dead. And what that tells us is that Christ expects us to do everything that we can do before he'll do what only he can do.
Oh, I love that.
And when he said that line, I was just stunned. It sunk in. It made so much sense. And, you know, what you were talking about, seeing people that, you know, they pray for healing and they get better for a little while. I've got one family that I talk to all the time. There's a Myasthenia Gravis group that they started and that I'm on a fair bit. It's oriented towards Christians. And, you know, they were watching my story, but he just wouldn't give up these other foods. He was insistent that he'd been told he was going to be supernaturally healed and that everything was going to be hunky-dory from then on. And, you know, so he did get better for a while, but then, like you said, nothing changed. And then he keeps getting sick. Winds up in a crisis back in the hospital for various things. And it's kind of a lot of sorrow in my heart to see him going through that. And, you know, I've tried talking to him about it a few times, that sometimes, you know, God does answer prayers, but sometimes the answer is no.
Yep.
And we have to be willing to accept that and try something else. And I've seen a lot of people go through the same thing. You know, in these groups that we belong to, you'll see a lot of these conversations where somebody will go to church and they've gotten so much better using carnivore, and somebody else notices, and how did you do that? How did you reverse your diabetes and lose all this weight? So they tell them, and then they're like, oh, I couldn't give that up. So they'd rather keep their diabetes and keep taking insulin and all that, rather than give up stuff that's actually making them sick. And part of the problem is for so many decades, the government has convinced us about a certain way of nutrition, and it's all wrong. Most of it's based on corruption and lies.
Exactly.
And we've got a system in place that's designed to keep people sick and make money off them staying sick and treating them long term. And whenever you try and go against that, man, they just come at you like you wouldn't believe. And, you know, I'm sure that doctors never intended to do that when they decided to become a doctor, but they're being trained into a system that's built around that whole model. And it's very unfortunate that people have to suffer that way. And if you look, you know, it was 1979, they brought that food pyramid in officially and made it the law of the land for, you know, school lunches and welfare programs and all that kind of a thing. And the corruption that surrounded all of that. And then if you look at the statistics and you watch the rise in the use of sugar and hydrogenated oils and all these ultra processed foods, you'll see the exact same rise in chronic disease and obesity and diabetes and all these other horrible diseases that were almost unheard of before all of this.
Yep. And I think it's really, you continue.
I was just going to add that it's so sad to see that. And when I found out about this, when I went carnivore and I started seeing some of the other videos and realizing what had been done to us, I was so angry for a good week. I was bitter and angry. All the decades that I've spent. I mean, I've suffered from chronic health issues from the time I was born. I was born with bronchitis, so I've spent many times living in oxygen tents. That was kind of the accepted treatment way back then. Yes, I'm old. So, and I also spent a lot of years, literally years, on antibiotics. I would get constant ear infections. And matter of fact, at one time I had lost about 85% of my hearing to scar tissue in my ears. And luckily, I had a mother that liked to research. So she discovered vitamin E oil. And over a period of about 10 months, she restored most of my hearing with that.
Oh, wow.
And that's when we started learning that, doctors don't know everything.
Yeah.
And then when I was 12 or 13, yeah, it was 12 or 13, I can't remember exactly which, my martial arts instructor noticed that something was wrong, because I had gone from, like a normal kid doing normal martial arts training to somebody who was losing his balance and just couldn't function very well. And he recognized the signs. So he told my mom, told her to get me into a doctor. And so our family doctor at the time confirmed, yeah, it looks like you've got it. I'll set you up an appointment with the specialist. It was going to take about 6 months. So in the meantime, my mom took me down to visit my sister, and she lived in a larger city, and they got me into a naturopath, funnily enough. And the naturopath, he put me on a very strict diet and put me on a bunch of vitamins. And by the time I went to the specialist 6 months later, all signs of it were gone. So of course, the specialist conclusion was that, well, you were misdiagnosed, you never had it, you're fine. Which of course went into my medical records, which is what made it so difficult to get properly diagnosed when I started getting sick again 30 years later. So it's been a constant struggle all of my life with all these different medical issues. And when I was a kid, I used to get migraines and stuff all the time. And now I know that it's from the various foods that I was sensitive to. So I know
I have to laugh a little bit that you said you only got angry for a week, because I would have been angry for a lot longer. I think it's definitely one of my bugbears that this is, because of course that's my job. My job is to see people who have gone through, so much when it comes to health issues, and the sad part is that they didn't have to go through those issues, and that there was another way. And often they go to the doctor, and the doctor, will say, no, it's not anything to worry about, or it's all normal, or take these drugs. But at no point do they go, hey, something really wrong has gone wrong with your body. Let's see if we can change it or fix it or do something about it. And by the time they get to me, they're almost at the end of the rope. They're almost, like, you're my last option, you're my last resort, I'm giving up after this. And I'm like, gee whiz, the pressure is all on me now. But it saddens me because of all of the education, all of the corruption, all of the money that has gone into this, and all of the science that has been corruptly misused. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that people try and do the best that they can by looking for what does the research say and what does the science say. But that's bought and paid for. Like, we're not getting really good, accurate science because the money isn't there to do it, and people don't understand. It's kind of like looking at a foreign language. And I talk about this one all the time because I think it's a really good, quick, clear scenario that in science, the term significant simply means we're pretty sure that that's what causes the thing. If we do this action, we're pretty sure that this is the result that that's going to create. So, for example, with blood pressure, there's a scientific study that says if you reduce salt, you're going to have a significant decrease in blood pressure. What that actually means when you read the actual paper is that they reduced salt in a number of participants, and they saw a 0.01% reduction in blood pressure in that study. But they were pretty sure that it was the salt that actually created that 0.01%. But we, as the normal person, goes, oh, well, it's a significant result. That must mean it absolutely makes a tremendous difference, because that's what our language says, but it's not the language of science.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And part of the problem with a lot of these research papers is they're based on epidemiological studies. Which aren't real studies. They're just, they're looking for correlations in data, but you can look at data and come up with the most ridiculous correlations that make absolutely no sense. So when you're looking at these studies, you just have to apply some common sense, and you need to look for actual double-blind studies that are peer-reviewed science. And that's, it's well and good to say that, but now there's a scandal that's been coming out the last 3 or 4 years of all this corruption in the peer review process.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and so you're at a point where you don't know what to trust.
Yeah.
So it comes down to, you find other people that have gone through the same thing, have found some healing, and you talk to them and do what they do.
And that's why it's important to share these stories for me. And that's what I think is why it's important for us to create platforms for this information and this knowledge to be shared, because you can't trust all of this stuff because there is corruption. Wherever there's going to be people and money, there's going to be an element of corruption that could potentially take place. Like, one of my favorite ones is the China study. So the China study has been used to convince people that veganism is the way to go for your heart health. And what they did was they looked at a particular population in this small village in China that predominantly ate vegetables. They didn't just eat vegetables, but that was probably 90% of their diet was vegetables and fruits and plant matter. And 10% was, meat. But that was because they were too poor to have any more meat than that actual allowance. And so that particular population had a lower rate of heart disease. And so the study goes, look at these people, they've got a lower rate of heart disease. But they negated one really important factor. And that is that in that particular culture, if you died of heart disease, it was shameful for your family. And as Westerners, we don't really understand family shame because we don't really have it that much. But for them, that means you can't get the good jobs, you can't get the good fiancés, and you can't get the good houses, and you can't get all of those things. So doctors weren't reporting deaths from heart disease. They were reporting them as something else. And so, we've got to try and bring in all of these factors when we're looking at it. And I'm with you. Let's go to the people who are actually feeling better and hear what they've got to say about what actually is working for them.
Well, there's an example that I really like that I think it's Dr. Chafee talks about this, Dr. Anthony Chafee. You've obviously, you know about him. He works out of
Australia. He's over here in Australia.
Yeah. So I love the example that he talks about. There's the Maasai tribe in Africa, and they eat, nothing but meat and dairy and blood. Yep. And then there's another tribe right beside them that are primarily vegetarian, and they intermarry. They're basically the same people, except for what they eat. But consistently across the board, the people born in the other tribe and raised in the other tribe are smaller of stature, have more health issues, they aren't as strong, they don't have as much energy. That kind of tells you a great deal right there.
Yeah. Well, the same is true when I started my naturopathic study. One of the first things that I did, because I was so fully into nutrition at that point, that I just started to read the nutrition stuff. And the first article that I was reading for an assignment was on the centenarians. So it was basically people who have lived over 100, and they did some research on, like, what was their diet like, how was their health, and all of the things. And there was this absolute comparison between the vegetarians, there was no vegans at that point, and the meat eaters. So they had both people that they were looking at. And what they found was that the vegetarians actually often didn't have any of their teeth by the time they'd reached over 100. They were a bit more frail, they were a bit more weak, and they definitely stopped having sex. Whereas the meat eaters were still working out in the field. They were still like plowing around, doing all the things that they needed to do. They mostly had majority of their teeth. Some of them had lost them through accidents and so on. But majority, they still had their teeth. They still had their muscle density. They still had their bone density, and they were still sexually active at over 100 years of age. And that for me at that time was like, how can we not see that there's this night and day experience here between these two groups of people that have lived over a century of their life eating particular ways, and we can see that there's a dramatic difference. And I don't know which way I want to go.
Yeah, exactly right. I loved an interview that Dr. Chafee did just a little while ago. He interviewed a woman who's a rancher. Her and her husband are ranchers, in the interior of British Columbia. So just in the province next door to me. And she's in her 80s and she's been carnivore for 65 plus years.
Wow.
And her husband still work that ranch. I mean, they're both carnivore, but they both work the ranch. They work right beside any of the hands that they've got helping them out with stuff, or, you know, neighbors or people that they've hired, and they're right in the field working right beside them. And I mean, I think she's like 82 or 83 or something. It's just insane. And, you know, I couldn't work that hard when I was in my 30s. You know, 20s was a little different because, you know, in my 20s, I was a lot healthier. I was working out at the gym, pumping iron, and riding mountain bike 100 kilometers a week or so. And I drove tow trucks.
And youth masks a whole heap of things. Like,
yeah,
there's
exactly.
the vitality in youth that you just, like, you know, wasted.
Yeah, once I hit my 30s, then it all started catching up with me. And so it's just crazy how things have changed in my outlook on life just by being able to be on carnivore. You know, as of today, I've been carnivore for 13 weeks, and it's completely changed my life. I've lost enough weight, and now that I'm free of the myasthenia gravis issues, which is what prevented me from getting back surgery before. They didn't want to do it because of the myasthenia gravis. So once I lost enough weight again, and now the myasthenia is not an issue, so now they've booked my MRI, and hopefully after the MRI, they're doing that this summer. I think Canada takes a few months to get in for this kind of thing.
Yep.
But so I've got that. So I'm hoping by the end of this year, I'll have had my back surgery. Once I've done that and I'm healed up from that, I can go and work again at a job where I can make some serious money. So, you know, because of all the health issues for so many years, I mean, we're so far in debt, it's not even funny. So, I mean, that's the first goal is, you know, go get a job where I can make a bunch of money in a hurry and get out of debt, and then get our own little place out in the country and get out of the city. And I couldn't even have thought of that 6 months ago. It wasn't even on the radar, really. I mean, I had a dream of maybe one day, but, you know, knew it could never happen.
But now there's reality to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's completely different. And my wife is absolutely tickled. I mean, she was my primary caregiver for many, many years, like about 15 years, basically. And so now she's like really excited to have her husband back. And, you know, she's really looking forward to how her life's going to change after the surgery. And we've even put our name in to get moved to another apartment. I'm giving up our wheelchair accessible apartment because I don't need it anymore, and I'm confident I never will again. So yeah, it's wonderful. I think we're one or two away on the waiting list to get into a new building. So because right now I'm not only on AISH, which is the disability, but I'm in a rent control building. So we're going to be moving to a little nicer rent control building, but it won't be a wheelchair accessible apartment anymore.
Yeah.
And then hopefully the next move after that will be to our own property. And it's all thanks to carnivore. I mean, there's just no way this would be happening without it. It's just completely changed my life.
So I want to ask a couple of questions around the mental health side of that, because I find for a lot of my patients that it's really challenging for them having you know, dreams and aspirations and things that you would love to obtain, but not actually the realization of that this could actually happen because I'm too sick for this to actually happen. How could I ever actually get there? So I'm curious how you have navigated that space over your experience with all of these health complications and now into carnivore.
Well, I have certainly had some major long-term bouts of depression. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar when I was like 19. And you know, I've been on medications in the past, but I haven't used medication for it for a long time. I just didn't like other stuff that it did to me.
Yeah.
But, this is the other beautiful thing about carnivore that I've noticed is my bipolar has basically disappeared. I mean, I still get a little depression sometimes, or sometimes I'll get a little, that extra excitement that maybe a normal person wouldn't have, but the swings are almost non-existent now.
Yeah.
And I've, because of the Asperger's, I've had some real issues with OCD. And that is, I mean, I still have a few little things here and there but it's not like it used to be. Like, it used to be if I didn't do something that my OCD said I needed to do, it was almost like glass in the brain. Just It was like a constant thing, and I it wouldn't go away until I did it. And now I don't have that. I mean, I'll still get a desire to do those things every once in a while, but I can ignore it and it just goes away. It's not something I have to worry about anymore. So, I mean, that's been absolutely huge. I mean, when I was bedridden on all these medications, there were quite a few times if I'd have had the physical capability to commit suicide, I would have. I mean, because to me, it had gotten to a point where my fear of living the way I was worse than my fear of dying.
Yeah.
And and of course that also affected my wife. I mean, she saw it, and then she started suffering from major depression. And I mean, things got really bad there for a while. So luckily for us, we've got our church community, and even though we weren't able to go, if we needed something, we could always call on the church, and they would always come and help us out with stuff. Sometimes they would even pay for bills if we got so far behind. They paid for our rent a few times and bought us groceries a few times over the years. And without them, I don't think we'd have survived it. But so it was definitely a huge struggle for me. And I mean, I grew up in a house where my dad was almost never there, and my mom, we found out many years later that she was undiagnosed bipolar. So growing up with her, I went through a lot of mental abuse.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of trauma there, and also had every once in a while she'd take in some foster kids and stuff. And one of the foster kids they brought in sexually abused me when I was about 8 years old. And that certainly caused a lot of years of trauma and confusion and that kind of thing. It took me many
Absolutely.
years. Yeah, I was into my mid 30s before I really kind of dealt with most of the trauma from that. And the confusion, sexual identity and that kind of stuff, the confusion around that probably lasted until I was in my mid-teens before I finally figured out, I'm just a normal heterosexual person, right? But I mean, it definitely it messed me up for a long time, and I think that was all kind of part of it. And then when I got so sick, and was spending 12 to 16 hours a day in bed, I had all this time to stew on this stuff.
Yeah.
Finally, I started to figure out, well, when this starts to hurt too bad, maybe I should be doing some prayer instead. So I started spending a lot of hours in prayer every day, and that helped me get past the suicidal stuff. And then I just hit that wall in 2018 or 2017, late 2017, somewhere in there. There's a long chunk of my life where I don't have very good memory because of all the drugs. But once I hit that wall and I just had to make the decision, something had to change, and I was going to have to take my health into my own hands, forget the doctors. And, it's funny too, because even as I'm improving my health, so many times I'll have a doctor say, well, you shouldn't be doing this and you shouldn't be doing that. And yet those are the things that are making me healthy.
Yeah.
Right? It's craziness. And to have a doctor come to you and tell you that diet has nothing to do with disease. Well, if your doctor ever tells you that, it's time to find a new doctor.
Yeah. I clearly don't understand it. Like if you were sitting there eating arsenic, then they would say, hey, that's going to kill you, right? It's the same thing. You're putting poisons into your mouth. It's going to create some problems.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, all of those ultra processed foods and hydrogenated oils and all that stuff. It's just about as bad for you as arsenic. It's just a little slower.
Yeah, exactly.
And so many people have such a hard time wrapping their brain around the fact that everything we've been taught about nutrition is just simply wrong.
Yeah.
And,
look, I had that challenge too. Like, all of my training, like, I'd spent decades learning about all of this stuff and learning about, fruits and vegetables and how to make wheat digestible and, all of the stuff. I taught sourdough classes. Like, I've done all the things. And I had to really go, I'm just going to press pause on that part of my brain that says all of these things for right now. I'm just going to press pause and see what happens. Because I had led people through carnivore previously, but I hadn't called it carnivore. It was just the no plants version of GAPS. And it started out with like, we'll go with GAPS, which is gut and psychology syndrome or gut and physiology syndrome, a dietary protocol where we get rid of all the grains and the sugars and all of the things. And we just go back to really simple meats and vegetables and slow cooked and all of the stuff. And so, I'd led people through, that type of process before where, we'd had the meats and the vegetables, but they just kept getting gas. Like they just were like gassy. And I'm like, as soon as you've got gas, you're not digesting something. So let's take some things out and figure out what you're not digesting. And every time it was the vegetables. Every time it was the vegetables. It was very rarely that it was the meat that caused it. Like somebody may have a meat that's doing it, but it's because they've got an allergy to that particular meat. And once we got rid of that particular meat, it was fine. And so, I've seen people come back from terminal bowel cancer from just eating meat for a year. And I've seen people come back from brain cancers by eating meat for a year. And all of this stuff, like I'd seen it with my own physical eyes and I'd done it with my own patients just by following their symptoms. But I hadn't gotten to the point of going, oh no, this is a healthy way to live, because of all of the education and all of the stuff that I had been indoctrinated with as well, as to what a healthy diet actually looks like and what it constitutes and what constitutes being healthy and all of those types of things. And so for the average person, I can absolutely understand how it's challenging for them to get to that place of like, I'm going to let go of all the fruits and vegetables, because like surely they're healthy for us, right? Aren't they? They're healthy for us, right?
Yeah,
maybe they're secretly trying to kill you, but hey.
Well, it's funny, there was a doctor in the United States that he figured out in the 1800s that meat would cure all kinds of chronic disease and stuff. Even though there wasn't much of it back then, there was enough that him as a doctor, he went on like a 30-year research study, essentially, and discovered that meat was really the answer to this. And so he actually developed kind of a meat product that he would turn his patients onto and get them to eat that. And many people know of what he developed back then, called Salisbury steak, if people are familiar with Salisbury steak. Of course, invented by Dr. Salisbury. And, and then you see, in the mid 1900s, all of a sudden, that all starts getting forgotten about and done away with. And it's just crazy how that happened. He had it figured out back then.
It's the same with diabetes. Diabetes had the same thing. They got to the point where they realized they needed to keep these people off carbohydrates, and they had to include some fasting for them. And that was going to be the way that you treat diabetes, is reduce and remove the carbohydrates and get them to do some fasting, even if it's a couple of times a week. And that was going to be the standard of care. And then insulin was invented. So why would we make people fast, and why would we get rid of their carbohydrates when all we've got to do is inject them again with some insulin? And so, it has happened all through history that these things have actually come about. Like I was looking at a treatment model, I think it was about 100 and something years ago, maybe 150 years ago. And it was talking about if you have these particular conditions, you have to eat a low carbohydrate diet. And basically the recommended foods were mostly 90% carnivore. And I was like, they knew and they've known, but there's been the shutting down of that information for so long. So on another point, I'm curious about this question, because I get it all the time where people say to me, but carnivore is so restrictive. I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Well, sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge to come up with some variety, but I've always loved to cook, and I've taken a lot of recipes that I had developed or learned about recently and adapted them to this way of eating. So I mean, we've got all kinds of different cuts of meat that we can do different things with, and I'm not finding that we're bored at all. I mean, I've been doing this for over 3 months now, and I just love my meat. And once I got used to eating so much fat, sometimes I can actually overdo it and wind up putting a little weight back on because I'm eating too much fat. So I do have to be careful. I try and keep my fat intake to about 30% by volume of the meat that I eat. And I also try and limit pork to about 30% of all the meat that I eat. And that seems to be doing the trick for me. I don't have eggs very often, but I can. And what I discovered once I went on carnivore and eliminated all these foods, I started figuring out that there's so much stuff I'm allergic to now. If I accidentally get anything that's even remotely related to a nightshade, which would, of course, we know those tomatoes and potatoes and eggplants, but it also includes, bell peppers and spicy peppers, red pepper, that kind of thing.
Chilies for some people. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me,
paprika.
Yeah, paprika is another one. So I discovered early on that paprika is definitely a no-no, which was so sad for me because I used to use a ton of really super hot spices. I was always looking for the next best hot spice that I could find. I mean, I loved it. Not realizing the damage it was doing to me. Now, if I even have a little bit of paprika, I found this out with smoked paprika because that was one of my favorites. And within an hour of consuming that, the pain in my joints, wrists and hands and everything flares, and my neck will start to get sore again. So and I discovered, we went through our spice shelf and threw away everything that had additives or sugar or stuff that I knew I couldn't have, and some stuff that I thought I'd be okay with, like rosemary, for instance. It turns out I'm allergic to rosemary. And this was I discovered about a year ago that I had to give up gluten. And so when I started going back to church, every Sunday we have sacrament, and it's different in the Catholic Church the way they do it to the way we do it, but we just use normal bread usually.
Yeah.
But they had these little crackers that they would put in there for people that were gluten-free. So that's what, and they also sometimes would have popcorn, just plain popcorn that they would bless for the sacrament. So the first couple of times I took the popcorn, which was fine. The next time they didn't have any, so I used one of those little pieces of cracker. Well, yeah, it was gluten-free, but it was made with hydrogenated oil. And within an hour of taking the sacrament, I was in pain.
Yeah.
So now I've discovered, now that I've been on carnivore for a while, I can take a little piece of just regular bread and I don't react to it now. So not that I would try and eat a slice of bread. There's just no way. But I can handle that without an issue. But yeah, so I discovered so many of these things that I'm allergic to that I used to eat tons of all the time. And it's been really eye-opening to just, if a person is suffering from chronic disease of any kind, 99% of the time, it's going to be something that you're eating.
Yep.
And it stands to reason that if it's something you're eating, if you give it up, you're going to get better. It seems pretty logical to me, but a lot of people just can't seem to wrap their minds around that.
I think the big challenge for a lot of people is the social conditioning. Like, we've been really conditioned as food. And I talk about this with a lot of my clients all the time, that, you know, they're like, but I love having like people over for dinner and those types of things. And what I will say to them is, why do people come for that? Are they coming just because there's food on the table? Because if that's the case, they might as well just stay home. Like, you know, they could eat at home and it would be less hassle. They wouldn't have to get dressed up and go out. They come because they want the connection. So how about, instead of the focus being on the food, we actually bring the focus on really engaging in conversation and connecting, about being curious about what's happening in each other's lives, and, you know, really engage in that conversation instead of it just being about the food. But people have been educated that you've got to put out on like all of these things on the table in order for people to come. And it's like, no, if they really actually like are loving and they want to be connected, they really wouldn't care if there was soup on the table. If that's all that was there, they would come because they want to connect. So let's bring our focus back to that. And we've got to start working through some of that social sort of constructive and cultural sort of knowledge that's been put there for us about, you know, some of these things. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of people. Like, what would a birthday be like without a birthday cake? Make a big cake.
Yeah.
There are definitely carnivore cakes out there and you can make them, but, you know, is the birthday cake? Maybe it is. Take the choice. Like, make the choice. I'm going to wear the consequences. Like, no, if I eat this birthday cake tomorrow, I'm going to feel lousy and it's going to take me 3 more days before I start to actually really feel better from having this birthday cake. If that's the price that you're willing to pay the price, but do it knowingly. Do it that you know that that's the actual price that you're going to pay for that experience. Or go, maybe I don't even really want the cake. I just want to celebrate with my friends. Let's play a board game or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I get similar questions a lot around that same thing, you know, and it's like, it's just not worth it to me, you know, when because to eat something just to be social with my friends doesn't make any sense, to then suffer pain for days because of it. I won't do it. And I know some people, it seems to be a real struggle. My wife's been really struggling, trying to go carnivore, although, to be fair, she had her gallbladder removed, so it's got to be a much slower process for her.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, she's got to do her cheat thing and go have a little ice cream or a donut or a cupcake or something. But she's getting better. You know, I have to say, she's getting a lot better with it. And at first, she was like completely against me going carnivore. You know,
no.
all these same stories. Oh, it's going to give you heart disease, and you know, you go carnivore, it's going to kill you, and all these doctors are saying you can't do this long term. And it took me a long time of doing my own research and then being able to present the evidence to her for her to finally be okay with me being carnivore. So it was definitely, there were, you know, the first 3 weeks there was a little contention there, but when she saw the results, then she couldn't argue with it anymore. So, and, you know, with me being Asperger's, you know, the first thing I did when I found out about carnivore is I literally spent hundreds of hours watching YouTube videos and researching online and doing all this stuff that I normally do with the OCD thing, you know.
Yeah.
And so I've become reasonably knowledgeable in the field, and something that I really enjoy doing on these groups is answering questions and helping people out that are just coming in. It was another reason why I started the YouTube channel. So I've done a few things on there that are kind of interesting. I did a video about what to say to vegans and vegetarians when they come at you about cruelty to animals and all this kind of thing, and, you know, the supposed environmental concerns around cows and that kind of thing. And so I take it through on the video. Man, it took me more research to do that than I used to do on all my other videos. It was crazy. But I've got the charts and the graphs and the research and the quotes and all that kind of thing. And I debunk everything step by step, one after another in that video. And it's been a pretty popular video.
I think it's really interesting because, of course, it's something that I tend to talk with people a lot about, especially when it comes to, you know, I work a lot with farmers. So, you know, I have a whole bunch of organic farmers that work with me and so on. And we just have the most amazing conversations. But the thing that usually it comes back to is that a lot of these people that are sharing this propaganda about farming and animals and all of that type of stuff have never actually been on a farm, even never actually like spent even a day looking at a farm, being on a farm, or seeing how any of this is actually made, what it's doing to the environment, what these monocrops are actually doing, etc., etc. Like majority of them have very little understanding of actual animals. And I remember occasionally I'm very, I can't keep my mouth shut, all right? And therefore am sometimes a little bit controversial. And there was a conversation on my Facebook page about the cruelty to animals. Like, how fair is it that we raise these animals to live a life of suffering? And I'm like, well, if you're taking that analogy and you're saying they're living a life of suffering, which is not, at that time I was living around acres and acres of like beef cattle. Like literally the house that I was in was surrounded by beef cattle. They were not unhappy. They were very happy cattle. But let's assume that they've got a miserable life and it's suffering. Then should we also then go and sterilize every individual that's not rich enough to raise a child that might potentially go through suffering, because we're getting rid of the suffering that's happening? And they didn't really like that argument.
Well, I know one of my big responses to the whole PETA argument, the cruelty to animal thing, is I point out to them that, having grown up as a farmer, I know this to be true because I've seen it with my own eyes. When you go out in the spring and you cultivate the fields, well, all winter long, there was a bunch of little critters that made their homes in the fields. So when you go out and you start cultivating, you're killing all those animals.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same thing when you plant your crops, and then they grow for a while, the critters move back in. And then a lot of farmers, especially on these large production facilities, they'll go out and they start spraying their pesticides and all that. And then that kills off some of the critters. And then the birds will come in and they start eating those little critters that died from the poisoning. Mm-hmm. And then that causes birth defects with their young, and sometimes it kills them off as well. And you look at what those chemicals and stuff have done to the honeybee industry.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that if we lose honeybees, we lose a great deal of plant life out there. And then when you have these massive combines going down the fields, and a lot of times you'll have 3 or 4 of them staggered in a row, there's no way that the animals can get out of their way. And plus you're fencing off these areas. So if you have like deer or elk or moose or whatever, depending on the country you're in, jumping the fences and eating the crops, the farmers will come along and destroy them or chase them off. So how is that any better than us raising an animal with a happy life in a field? And then we come along when it's time to harvest them, they don't even know anything's happened to them.
Yep.
They're gone and they don't know a thing about it. And they've had a pretty good life. And for that one person, you kill a cow, butcher it up, you got food for a year for a couple of people, versus the hundreds of animals that died in those crops when they were harvested and all of that stuff. So, how is that any better? It just, it doesn't, if you look at it logically, it makes no sense.
Well, I'm with you, of course. One of the other things that I think about is that people forget that the wild is savage. Like, for those animals that are prey, they're prey animals, they're predatory animals. I think about it from my own death. I think I would much rather not know my death is coming and it be over and done with quickly and humanely as possible, versus I'm literally dying as the tiger is ripping my limbs off of my body. Like, that's how it happens in the wild, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, from that perspective, I know which one I would rather choose. We're all going to die at some point in time, and those animals are going to die in some point in time. So let's give them the best life. And yes, we should definitely do our utmost to make sure that we are giving them a good life and we are providing them with the best that they can actually have. But also that we're, making sure that death is as quick and as painless as it possibly can be as well. But when we're looking at the bigger picture, everything here is going to die. So what's a better choice to actually, which way to choose? Like, I know a friend of ours, they have chickens. They were free ranging chickens. So they would have them in these pens, and the vegan activist groups went out and they released the chickens overnight. So he'd put his chickens in their pens for the night. They went and released them. The next morning, half of his chickens were still alive, but bits of their bodies were missing because the foxes had gotten into them overnight because they let them out. And so they weren't protected and they weren't safe, and they were traumatized in their death versus what their life and death was going to be like as chickens that were laying, you know, free range eggs. It's just, there's a bigger picture in the whole thing.
Yeah, I know. I used to just shake my head when I'd see those news stories about, you know, these groups going in and releasing animals and that kind of thing. And it's like, they don't have a clue what they're actually doing to those animals by releasing them. You know, they're domesticated farm animals. They're not equipped to be on their own surviving in the wilderness. It doesn't work that way.
Exactly. It'd be like taking a couple of children that have lived in the middle of suburbia and dumping them in the desert. Like, yes. Anyway, I want to come back to, I'm curious as to what other people have said to you as you've gone on this actual journey.
Oh, usually the first reaction is, oh, eating meat like that is going to kill you. And then, you know, then they start trying to come at me with all the research and need all these vegetables, and you need because you need the vitamins from them and all that kind of thing. And what they don't understand is that, well, not only is over 95% of the vitamins that are in plant matter not available to us to absorb, they're not bioavailable because our bodies aren't equipped to extract them, where ruminant animals are, because they eat grass and, you know, their whole system
I've got digestive systems. Yeah.
So, you know, it's absolute insanity. And the other thing is, when you're on a carnivore diet, you don't need a lot of these vitamins to repair the damage that the plants have been doing to you.
Exactly.
And you get all the vitamins that you need. Like I used to spend $300 a month on high-end expensive vitamins. And when I went carnivore, I was able to stop doing that. I don't take vitamins anymore. And according to my last blood tests, I'm perfectly healthy. I have no deficiencies of any kind. I just make sure I mix a little organ meat in every once in a while, you know, once every week or two, you know, I'll have a little liver or some kidney or heart or something. There's some local farmers around here that do the grass-fed beef, and they'll actually grind up some hamburger with a little bit of organ meat ground into it. So we do that every once in a while. And if you're feeling that you're short on vitamins, well, you can eat some eggs. They're chock full of the vitamins that you need. You know, the only stuff that I take that isn't like animal product is electrolytes. So I use the Keto Chow electrolyte drops, and that's got some trace minerals in it that are good for you as well. And I take the iodine for my thyroid, and I use apple cider vinegar a lot to help with the weight loss. And there's some other benefits there as well. And that's really, you know, the only supplements, you know, other than spices that I would normally use in my cooking. And I use very little. I use Himalayan salt, and I use some granulated garlic and some fresh ground pepper. And that's pretty much all I use for spices. Once in a while, I'll have some old-fashioned Dijon mustard that's got no sugar or additives or anything in it. And surprisingly enough, it's actually cheaper than regular Dijon. So go figure. That's not usually the case, but yeah,
you usually have to pay more for less.
Yeah, quite often. And this is kind of it's not like a generic brand per se, but it's like a house brand of one of the big grocery chains in Canada. So that's probably one of the reasons it's so inexpensive. But that's it for, you know, I even found out some oils that are supposed to be safe for carnivores. I discovered I was allergic to olive oil, which was really disappointing for me because I love the taste of olive oil, and I like to use it in cooking. But once I was free of all the chronic pain and everything, I tried using a little olive oil and reacted to it. And then I looked and realized, no, it's one of those cheap ones that are full of other oils that they've mixed with it. So my wife went out and she found an imported olive oil from Greece that was pure, and I reacted even to that. And
oh wow,
yeah, it was such a bummer for me. So apparently I can still tolerate avocado oil, but it's really expensive, and it's just cheaper to go with the animal fat and butter. I mean, we can get just regular plain salted butter really cheap. Same thing with the unsalted, it's about the same price. And that, and I'll save the bacon fat and that kind of thing and use that an awful lot. If I feel I need to add some extra oil to the pan or something, that's what I'll use. And I don't miss the other oils at all.
Yeah.
It's not like I need it for salad dressing or anything.
Oh, I know, right? I know, right? So I'm curious as well, if for those people who are listening at home and they're going, you know what, I think I would like to give this a try. What would be your top tips that you would give somebody that's listening to this and going, you know what, I actually think I'll give it a try?
Well, I would caution people to not jump in with both feet like I did. Give yourself some time. I would transition slowly over about a 30-day period. So slowly increase your meat and fat content, slowly back off of everything else. So that by the time you're at the end of that 30-day period, you're a full carnivore. Then it's likely you won't suffer from the carnivore flu. Once you give up the sugar, there's going to be some cravings for a little while. Try not to replace that with artificial sweeteners, because research has shown that as soon as you put something sweet in your mouth, your body can't tell the difference. So it immediately kicks your insulin production up. And so your pancreas immediately goes, oh, something sweet, I got to produce insulin. And, too much insulin in your system is going to create issues, especially when there's actually no sugar there for it to process.
Yeah, your body then has to produce the sugar so that you don't go into hypoglycemia.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something I have to be pretty cautious of, because I mean, my mom was hypoglycemic and my dad was diabetic, and he was really bad. I mean, he had to inject for every single meal. So, and when I look back on what I know now, and I look back on how he suffered with the diabetes and what the doctors told him, it's just so sad. I mean, the stuff that he was suffering from diabetes wound up leading to getting a bunch of TIAs. So he wound up getting dementia from all these mini strokes.
Yeah,
it was caused by the diabetes. It was crazy. And
it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
like I find it, for me, my dad also had diabetes, and I watched him as a kid. He was an insulin dependent type 2 diabetic. And me looking back, I just go, oh my God, he went through so much that he didn't need to go through. The diabetes then caused depression, and then that caused something else. And by the time Dad passed away, he was on about 20 different medications for all of these different things. And if only somebody had said to him, just eat meat. Just eat meat. Forget about all of the rest and just eat meat. He would have happily done that because he really loved meat. But that's not what he got. He got told, eat low levels of meat and eat this many carbohydrates and this much Coca-Cola and this much blah, blah, blah. And it absolutely drives me batty. And the diabetes educators at my local hospital don't like me or didn't like me. So I challenged them on everything that they said. I had gestational diabetes, and I'd go along to those education things, and they'd be like, oh, you've got to eat this. And I'm like, but why would I want to put that in my body when that's going to cause this and this and this to happen? Oh, and they didn't know how to answer me.
Well, that's the problem. They have training in a very narrow set of specific areas that they're covering, and they don't look at anything else. And the whole medical profession is set up that way. they treat stuff vertically. They don't look at the whole person. And, you know, that's the number one mistake. And, you know, they're not interested in finding the underlying cause and curing it. They're interested in treating the individual symptoms. And that's exactly the way the pharmaceutical companies want it.
Exactly. Like I was saying before, I put it up on my little Twitter account that if I was somebody who was going to want to be rich and, you know, invest, I would invest in big ag, big food, big farm, big media, and then also probably, you know, big aged care facilities. Like, you know, that's where I'd put my money, and I would just be raking in the dough, because like every step of that way is leading into the other.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there is so much momentum built up in this system, everything being interconnected, and it's all about money and power. It's, you know, it's going to take something huge to cause that to change. And, you know, maybe we can change it slowly over time, but look at all the people that are going to suffer and die because of it. And it's times like that where I still feel that little bit of sadness and anger. But my answer for myself is I get out there and I try and spread the word. You know, I've become, instead of a Christian evangelist, I've become a carnivore evangelist. And I talk about it everywhere I go. And, you know, especially when people notice the changes in my health and how much of a difference it made for me, then I talk to people about it, and I belong to these different groups, and I do my best to answer questions and point people in the right direction. And I saw the most heartbreaking post on Facebook the other day. This guy put in this huge long post. It was like pages and pages long, going through all this, what he's suffered in the last 7 years with these weird diseases with his muscles that have caused all these open sores and extraordinary pain. And the doctors can't figure out what it is. He's gone through every doctor in Canada that even thinks they might know how to figure it out or do anything with it. And he's gone over to Europe to specialists there, and nobody has any answers for him. Nobody can do anything about it, and they've all given up on him. So I left him a post on a possible solution and left him the link to my channel. And I just pray that he sees it and is interested enough to check it out. Yeah. Because based on that post that he made, I don't think he's got that much longer to live if he doesn't figure it out. Yeah. So I'm really hoping that he sees that. But I'm with you, because for me, that's the reason that I share my own personal experience, my journey, and, you know, create these conversations as well, is so that we can get people to see that maybe there is hope. Maybe there is an alternative solution that they haven't actually looked at yet, that no one's presented for them, and that there is something that you can actually do instead of just wishing, hoping, and praying for a miracle to take it all away. Maybe there's some stuff that you can be doing as well. And I think, you know, it's why I like this space, is to be able to share these types of stories, because I can tell, I already know a few people who have your specific autoimmune condition that could benefit, but they need to hear it from somebody who's actually lived it, experienced it, versus me to say, hey, I think you should give this a go. And so, you know, I love to champion that on, because we need to get more out there. Well, I also started a Facebook group by the same name as my YouTube channel, so Fuzzy Road to Health. So you can find me through there as well, and I'm always open to talk to people. If they find my timeline on Facebook, like my personal timeline, it's just facebook.com/FuzzyD, and it's D spelled DEE. So yeah, I'm always available to talk, or if somebody wants to drop into the YouTube channel and leave a comment on a video. I had actually a really interesting comment. It was shortly after I started the channel, and I put up my first video about a little bit of my history and about being bedridden and all that kind of thing. So this guy reached out to me, and he said, well, I have a kind of a similar story. He says, I've got MS. I was bedridden for 10 years, and I couldn't wash myself. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't shave, couldn't feed myself. I was just totally stuck in bed, couldn't do a thing. And he finally talked his caregiver into putting him on carnivore after he saw some information about it. Now this is MS we're talking about, and he was like down to probably less than a year to live. And fast forward a year later, he was so healthy he could do everything on his own, and he'd even let go his care worker. And that's not supposed to happen with MS.
Exactly.
It's not supposed to be able to happen. And I've heard so many stories of, similar stories to this, and they go and try and talk to their doctor about it, and the doctor doesn't want to hear it.
Yep.
But
David, he just had spontaneous recovery. It was spontaneous recovery, or he didn't have MS to start with. He must have just bitten by a tick or something.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And you also see these stories of people healing from cancer. One guy in particular, he'd been vegetarian and or vegan most of his life, thought he was doing all the right things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he found out he had stage 4 bowel cancer. And he had like this huge tumor. It was like 6-inch tumor or something, which would be about 15 centimeters.
Yep.
And, he was given less than a 4% chance of survival if he followed their plan of all the chemo and all that stuff. So he said, no, thank you. And the first thing he did was a 21-day fast. And in 21 days, he shrunk the tumor by 50%. And then he went full carnivore after that. And 8 months later, he was completely cancer-free. Now, he did wind up doing 1 or 2 chemo treatments just to help deal with the pain at one point. And as soon as it killed the pain, he said, okay, that's enough. I want no more. And he just stayed carnivore. And I mean, and you hear story after story like that when you start checking into the community and seeing what's going on. It's just,
and I've had patients like that as well. So, one story for me really in particular was I had a young mum. She was in her 30s and she had 3 little boys. So her youngest was 2, and she was diagnosed with terminal bowel cancer. And they basically said, you've got about 6 months to 12 months to live. And when she came to me, the goal that she came with was not to beat cancer. The goal was to live as long as I can and be as healthy as I can. So my quality of life with my boys is as long as I can make it, and I'm as healthy as I can make it. So that's what we did. We went, okay, that's our goal. And so I know the best way at that point in time that I knew to do that was to let's go into GAPS. That's going to make you keto. That's going to make you, reduce all of those foods for those things. But we couldn't get the plants in. We just kept, trying pumpkin and carrot and all of the stuff. And again, she'd have gas every single time. And so it ended up being, we'd try some herbs and spices here and there, and we'd try some things every so often because she'd be like, oh, I'm so sick of meat. We'd try something every so often. The gas would come back. So by the end of 18 months, she was completely cancer-free and, was able to start bringing in some of those vegetables that she wanted to bring in. But at the time, she didn't care about the vegetables that much. It would have been nice to have the vegetables, but she didn't care about them because she was healthy and she was well. And now her sons are graduating high school and she's starting to see them go and do things that she wouldn't have been able to do had we not gone down that pathway. If she'd just gone down the pathway that was put in front of her, which was you've got 6 to 12 months to live and there's nothing you can do about it, so go live your life, then she wouldn't be living her life right now. And that's the sad thing.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you hear stories like that where people, they had no hope, and yet a simple dietary change and they were healed.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get across to people that food can be medicine, but it can also be the root of your disease.
Exactly.
And so many people, they just can't accept that because doctors have told them otherwise all their lives.
Exactly. And I think, again, it comes back to a lot of the social stuff as well. Like, for those people, like we say it's a simple dietary change, but there are some challenges in it. Like, you've got to start to think a little bit differently about, like, what do you have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? What do you do when you get invited out for coffee, or, you go to somebody else's house? Like, those are things that we've got to kind of think about, but they're worth thinking about. They're worth facing some of those things about. And I think for me as well, I see this as a much more of a holistic thing. Like, if we can get rid of the physical ailments that are bothering us, we actually have room for the spiritual and the emotional ailments that, we've kind of been shoving down and suppressing with food the whole time. And I think it's where freedom actually is, when you can actually go into a situation that might be anxious or might create anxiety, but you're there with a, keen, stable playing field because your neurology is working really well, your bodily functions are working really well. You've got a much greater outcome than if you're in that space where everything's chaotic, your brain's not working well, your body's not working well. How are you actually even going to cope with any of those things? Like, for me, I think it's the place to create actual ultimate freedom.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's certainly been my experience. And I found too that because I'm on a weight loss journey, I mean, I've still got a long ways to go. As much as I've lost, I've lost like 195 pounds so far, but I've still got like another 75 to go.
Yeah.
So, my path's a little different than a lot of people that would be on carnivore. So when I first started, I only ate twice a day within a 6-hour window, so that I was getting that intermittent fasting. And now I only eat once a day. So a lot of that social pressure just isn't there. And, when I do go to somebody else's place and they want to offer me something to drink, no, just water's fine. But it hasn't been too much of an issue. And if they start trying to push different foods on me, I'm like, well, I just tell them I'm allergic.
Yeah.
And if they start asking a bunch of questions, well, then I become a carnivore evangelist.
I love it.
But I usually try and stay pretty low key, and unless they start asking a lot of questions. So
I'm probably too. I put everything out there anyway, so everybody probably knows already with me. And actually, that for me, I don't know if it's a strategy for you. We've got about the same left to go. So I've lost 88 pounds. And I have probably about 80 more to go to get to where I would be ideal. But also, one of my strategies has been to share it, because if I'm sharing it and I'm telling people what I'm doing, then I've got to keep doing it. I've got to keep creating the result.
Yeah, keeps you honest.
So absolutely, it's definitely a part of my strategy for my own health as well, along with showing people, you can reverse diabetes without medication. You can change your weight without any of these surgeries and things like that. By all means, if you want to use them, that's your prerogative. You're allowed to choose them. There are options that are available to you. But if you don't want to, there are also options that are available to you. And here's one of them. And here's my journey. And it's not always straight. It's not always going down the way that I want it to. Sometimes it's a little bit up, sometimes it's a little bit down, but that's life. Things happen in life, and it does keep me honest.
Well, I think another aspect for me anyway, to that whole scenario is that I feel very strongly that God led me to this diet. And
Same.
part of the deal that, the fact that he led me to this healing is that I'm supposed to share it with other people, because, he wants to lead them to healing as well. And God almost always works through other people rather than a direct miracle intervention. I mean, he does do that even to this day, but, it goes back to that saying, he expects us to do everything we can do before he's going to do what only he can do. And
I think when I hear that, I think of the story of, you've probably heard it as well, of the people that are in the flood, and the boat comes along and some people get on, come on, get on the boat. I'm like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And they climb up on the roof and he sends a helicopter, and it's like, no, I'm waiting for God to save me. And then finally they die, they go to heaven, and he goes, why didn't you save me? And he's like, I sent a bus, I sent a boat, I sent a helicopter. Like, you chose not to be saved.
Yeah, I've been known to tell that story a time or two. I love that story. But,
I love that story too.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
it's a very common scenario.
It so is. It so is. So we've been talking for quite some time. So I recognize that, you know, we want to be honoring of both your time, my time, and the audience's time. So thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure we could actually talk for hours and hours, which is why we have YouTube channels, right? Because we can talk for
Absolutely.
hours.
Absolutely. And I was absolutely tickled to be invited and happy to be here. And if we can only help one person with this video, it was completely worth it.
Yeah, awesome. So David has said, for those in the audience, that he's happy for you to reach out and talk to him. Go follow his YouTube channel, go find him on Facebook, have those conversations and start thinking about it. Even if you do what David did, which like, I'll start with 90 days and see what happens, because the likelihood is you won't stop there. Good. Thank you so much for joining me, David. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.